Hannah. I'm the founder of SET. I used to work with Sarah at a local mental health authority. So up until recently, I was a case manager in a crisis residential unit. So it's kind of really close to my heart, this topic. And I'll be the moderator for today's panel discussion with Sarah Kincheloe and Mark Hilbelink. Did I say that right, Mark?
Close enough.
Okay.
Sorry. Will you go ahead and say your name so everybody?
Well, that's the thing. Everybody says it differently, but yes, Hilbelink is actually correct.
All right. Cool. Good to know.
And Megan?
I'm Megan. I'm a production manager and currently coffee roaster. And I'm just friends with Hannah and happen to care about, you know, the houseless population, especially with everything that's going on. I recently got a petition in the mail. I'm sure some of y'all may have received it for Save Austin Now, and it just kind of reinvigorated a need to do more, especially in a time when we're all trying to find our place, you know, in a bunch of the civil rights movements happening right now. So I put just I blasted off on Instagram being like, who wants to do something about this? And I was super lucky to already know Hannah, and she's been involved in this. So yeah, we just decided to get together and figure this out. Would y'all two like to introduce yourselves?
Well, they will in a little bit, but please just say your name and
well.
So. Oh, you're muted, Mark.
Oh.
Mark.
There we go.
And I'm Sarah.
They're gonna introduce themselves more in detail.
Stay tuned for more.
So before we get started, just to go over some basic rules of engagement. Please feel free to continually make comments or any questions in the chat. You can select if you want to send it to all panelists and attendees, or if you just want to send it to someone specific, you have the option to do that. So please feel free to engage with us in that way. And some of the topics today might be a little bit uncomfortable or sensitive, or it might even be triggering. And if that's the case, I just wanted to give out the local psychiatric emergency room phone number. So if you start to feel unsafe or unwell, please feel free to leave anytime and, self-soothe. And if you feel like you need to reach out for professional help, you can type, or you can call 512-472-4357, which also spells help. It's a little bit easier. And Megan's typing it in the chat box now.
Just a plug, that's a great phone number for everyone to have written down somewhere. You are gonna come across somebody that needs it.
Absolutely. And then we ask that, this is a safe space for everybody to be able to speak about their opinions and ask questions, but try to be as respectful as possible. So that means if you disagree with someone, you are offering a criticism of their idea and not attacking the individual themselves. And just, be mindful that this is recorded. So just try to be, as kind as possible.
Looking at you, Gibson.
No abuse will be tolerated. And then if you have a question or comment, again, we're going to have a space later during a Q&A session after the panel discussion where you are able to ask Sarah and Mark directly a few questions. But, feel free to be typing it in as we're going on. And then just to go over the expected timeline of events for this call, we're going to do a few just quick full questions, and then I'm going to go over a few commonly used phrases that might come up when Sarah and Mark are speaking. And then we're going to go over the Q&A with them. You'll have a Q&A session to ask them questions. we'll go over a little bit of the petition, Save Austin Now, and why we find it harmful, in some ways that Megan has come up to kind of combat it here in Austin. And then we'll go into the auction portion. So we'll be talking meal kits, introducing stuff in the tote bags. We have a special cool edition that we kept secret. And then also that really cool one-on-one cooking class with Erin McDowell of the New York Times will be auctioned off too. So stay tuned and feel free to tell your friends to join in. They are more than able to come in halfway through.
So which one of you guys does the auctioneer voice?
I did a lot of research and I cannot do it. So
It requires a cowboy hat if you're going to do it right.
it absolutely does. I have to have a cigarette hanging out of my mouth, you know.
Sarah, so rude. Okay, so some poll questions. What percentage of individuals currently experiencing homelessness in Austin are from out of state? A, 8%, B, 54%, C, 17%, or D, 32%. Feel free to write it in the chat. Again, what percentage of individuals currently experiencing homelessness in Austin are from out of state? 8%, 54%, 17%, or 32%?
We've got a C so far, which would be 17%. You made that really hard too. You know, usually when it's multiple choice, it's like 20, 30, 67, or, you know,
Yeah.
like it's really obvious which answer it is, but that, all right, we got a 32%, two 32%.
17%, 17. All right, 30 more seconds. Okay, so the answer is 17%.
Oh.
And this is something that we'll discuss more later on down in our discussion, but contrary to the popular belief, our percentage of people has not changed from last year. So there's a misconception that the population of people experiencing homelessness have increased in Austin, and a lot of them have come from out of state. That's not true. 63.4% reported that they first experienced homelessness in Austin, whereas 19.4% experienced it somewhere else in Texas, so statewide. But 17 has been pretty consistent. Okay, number 2, true or false? For the first time in 2011, there have been more unsheltered people experiencing homelessness than sheltered. So true or false, for the first time since 2011, there have been more unsheltered individuals experiencing homelessness than there are sheltered individuals.
True, true, true. All truths.
The question was kind of, yeah. You guys are right, it's true. So last year in 2019, there are 1,169 sheltered to 1,086 unsheltered. And in previous years, that gap was a lot wider. So in 2011, it was 1,358 sheltered to 1,004 unsheltered. And it's kind of been narrowing down more. Yes, so unsheltered means yes. So somewhere not meant for human living. So that would mean like a tent on the streets, behind a building, in the woods.
Versus sheltered,
Which is
meaning it within still kind of in the houseless community, but like at an actual shelter.
mm-hmm.
Got it.
And then last poll question, which of the following is not a common cause of homelessness? A, racial inequality, B, lack of housing, C, C, lack of access to services for mental health, substance abuse, and or healthcare. Or D, domestic violence. So again, which of the following is not a common cause of homelessness? Racial inequality, lack of housing, lack of access to services for mental health, substance abuse, and or healthcare, or domestic violence.
All these.
Great. Yep. So the answer was worded specifically to be lack of housing and not lack of affordable housing. So just wanted to highlight racial disparities are absolutely one of the leading causes specifically for Austin. For example, 1 in 10 of the total population in Austin are Black and or African American, but more than 1 in 3 of those experiencing homelessness are Black. So it's a major disparity in our city. Cool. So now I'm just gonna go over really briefly, and Sarah and Mark, please feel free to jump in and add any details as you see fit. But I'm guessing we may speak about Camp RAT, which is RAT stands for Responsible Adult Transition Town. It's a self-governed unit of individuals experiencing homelessness near Montopolis, sorry, on 183. And they are state sanctioned. It is land given by the government, by Governor Abbott, to have people be miles away from downtown so that they remain out of sight, which we'll discuss about that as well. ECHO coordinated assessment may come up. ECHO is a nonprofit. They stand for Ending Community Homelessness Coalition. And then a coordinated assessment is kind of it's a single entry point for people experiencing homelessness. So instead of going to each organization and asking if they can get services, you kind of take this assessment, and then you'll get a score, and then they'll tell you what services would best fit your needs or what you're eligible for. The PIT count might come up. It's a point in time count, which means once a year in the last week of January, volunteers will go out and they'll take kind of a snapshot of what individuals experiencing homelessness might look like for that day. And so that's just like a point each year that we can kind of compare and contrast to make sure that we're actually making progress, or we can make changes to policies, local policies that might be needed. But in no way does it fully encompass the numbers, like the total numbers of those experiencing homelessness. So a few of the things that they look for are if they're an individual, if they're a member of a family, if they're an unaccompanied youth. We look to see if there's a presence of disability and what type of homelessness they're experiencing, whether it's chronic, repeated. And then CTOSH might come up, I don't know if it will, but it's basically a listserv through UT Austin. So that's a one communication channel that organizations can use to speak to each other. All the organizations who are serving the homeless. So it stands for Collaboration Technologies for Organizations Serving Homeless. MAP stands for Medical Access Program. This is through Central Health. It provides healthcare coverage for those in Travis County who don't have Medicaid, Medicare, private health insurance, and have low income. And just in case you didn't know what SNAP was, that's a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. And for this, you generally need to be at or below 130% of the poverty line, which for an average family of 3, that's $2,311 a month, or $27,700 a year. which is really, really low. And then
For a family of 3, that's insane.
yeah, for a family of 3. And there's usually a 3-month time limit with a few exceptions. And that's all. So we've got Camp Rat, Echo Coordinated Assessment, the PIC Count, CTOSH, MAP, SNAP. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But now we'll move into the Q&A portion with Sarah and Mark. We're going to start off with Sarah, if she doesn't mind. Tell us a bit about yourself, what your background is, and how you came to this profession. And then when you formerly were with the local mental health authority, why did you choose to work in their jail and hospital alternative?
Sure. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have been for 12 years or so. I worked in community mental health in Chicago, and then in New York. I worked on a mental health team there, and I also worked in a jail diversion type organization. And then coming to Austin, I've had a few different positions here. I've run a groups program. I did a jail diversion program here too, and I ended up working for the longest at Hospital and Jail Alternative, which is a crisis residential unit, a little bit similar to like a psychiatric hospital, and a little bit similar to a homeless shelter. It's like a mix of those two things. I really liked working there because we were catching people when they were wanting to change. And I might talk about this more later, but I think one of the most important things in helping change to occur is providing it right at the time that the person is ready for it. And sometimes if there are bottlenecks or delays, motivation waxes and wanes for all of us. So at the Hospital and Jail Alternative, people are experiencing a crisis and they're seeking help in that moment. And that's a great opportunity for us to be able to provide a lot of help when people are really actually wanting it. So that's why I sought that out and why I stayed there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you could please tell us a bit about yourself, what your background is, how you came to your profession, and what a typical workday might look like for you.
I work for Sunrise Community Church and Sunrise Homeless Navigation Center. And I grew up in a very small town in Iowa and never met a homeless person for most of my life. Not to mention lots of different other kinds of people for most of my life. And came to Austin and pastor a church to try to create the next cool church. We were going to try and have the cool church with the cool band and the cool pastor and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not that cool, so that was probably the number one hitch. But then after that, the next hitch was that homelessness really exploded out of downtown about 5 years ago. And we are right along the Ben White corridor, the 290-71 corridor. And that was really one of the first places along with 183 where homelessness really started to grow outside of downtown. And we ended up kind of having to, have a gut check to ourselves to say, what is our role going to be here? What are we going to do about this? And we decided that we were going to try and engage in some sort of way, and didn't know anything about anything. Made a lot of mistakes along the way. Famously got sued by the APD under a organized crime statute. And lots of fun things along the way, including death threats and, lots of things that have, my name's been drugged through a lot of different muddy waters over the years. But it's been a journey for us. It's been a journey for us as a church to really kind of say to ourselves, is this what we're about? Is this what we should be about? When a lot of other churches aren't about this, and still succeed. And when other, what does it mean to love your neighborhood when your neighborhood is in completely different socioeconomic places? How do you love both of them well? How do you love the school that's across the street from you? We have an elementary school across the street from us. and then how do you do homeless work well? Initially, I think like a lot of folks, we just wanted to hand out socks and socks and food, and then figured out that there's a whole lot more behind that. And over a period of years turned into still probably the only fully integrated facility in Austin for day centers to be able to do everything that a homeless person needs to do in one place. So I'm still the pastor of the church, but I'm also the director of the Navigation Center. And that ends me up in a lot of political stuff, and working with a lot of other organizations, and connecting with a lot of homeless efforts all around the city. So it's been a long, interesting journey. It's cost us a lot in terms of people and support from some people, but it's also allowed us to meet a lot of new people, and allowed us to have a lot of new connections with people that we never would have before. And ultimately, it's ended in about 500 people now that have been housed out of homelessness into housing through our doors. And that at any given time, probably roughly about 50% of the housing cases that are state or county run are coming through Sunrise in some way, shape, or form, which is just a bizarre reality when you consider kind of the breadth of what the rest of the community is doing. So it's an enormous responsibility, but it's been honestly a lot of fun. And it's just something that, we didn't intend to get into, we fell into, and then we tried to be responsible with where we're going with it.
And we'll start with you again, Mark, for the second question. You went into this a little bit, but please tell us how the Homeless Navigation Center was created, and what services do you provide to individuals experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, so the Navigation Center was basically started almost accidentally when we had homelessness coming over here, and we needed to do something. I basically had permission from my board to do anything that was free. And we, all the things that we could find to do were for free. We're like sign people up for food stamps and get mail and things that didn't cost anything. And slowly over time, we started to realize that there's a lot more to solving homelessness than just giving people sandwiches and accepting mail. And we really wanted, if we were going to go into this, we really wanted to be fully integrated. We really wanted to have mental health care, access to mental health care, access to physical health care, access to substance abuse treatment, the ability to do all of the housing pieces that need to be done, including housing assessments and housing navigation. We wanted to be able to do all of the things that a homeless person would need under one roof. Because as shocking as this is for most people, there's nowhere else in Austin where you can do that. And that I don't say that to toot our horn. I mostly say that to say it's kind of nonsensical that doesn't happen anywhere else, and it should, but it doesn't. And so we wanted that to be the case, and we fought hard to get each of those different programs plugged in here, either by us doing it or by bringing in services like Integral Care, our local LMHA, to come in here and do some of those services for us. And so still to this day, I mean, us being able to provide all those services is ultimately what we believe gets people housed, because we're meeting humanitarian needs, we're meeting mental health needs, we're meeting physical health needs, we're meeting housing needs, and all of those things are tied together, and all of us can talk to each other as we do it, so that we treat the whole person rather than just treating their housing need, or just treating their humanitarian need. It's not an or thing for us, and it's not a siloed environment. We try to treat the whole person, and I think it's been pretty successful as far as most people are concerned.
And it is a really big deal that you guys are able to hold on to a meal. Something that I wanted to highlight, it is really difficult for people to get continued services if they get their belongings stolen. So like their ID, birth certificate, social security, SNAP, Lone Star card, MAP insurance card, any type of thing that they need, it's impossible to get services without it. So the fact that there is a place where you can go, like for instance, Arch will hold mail, but you have to make a card in order to access their building, and then you have to wait. So the fact that places like Sunrise exist and they're able to do that for a large community is a really, really essential service. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing that I would say to that is that I think our vision for what homeless work should look like is that you can't decouple housing from humanitarian work. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people doing humanitarian relief without kind of a strategic backside to housing. And there's a lot of people doing housing work without the strategic front side of humanitarian care. And unless you can bring those two together, which unfortunately a lot of people are not willing to do or able to do, you're really going to only kind of treat half the problem, and they're going to get lost in between some of those spots.
This next question is for Sarah. In your many years of working in case management, what did you observe to be some of the biggest barriers or hurdles individuals face when trying to find permanent and stable housing?
Well, one of the things I mentioned before was just kind of the timeliness issue. So there are few resources and many who need, which creates like wait lists and bottlenecks. So did anyone else hear that? Okay.
My bad. We're on my computer. I got the text.
Yeah, so one of the big hurdles is that when people are ready and they're ready to talk to somebody and they're ready to get help, it's not available. And then when it is available, it's hard to find people. So that's one, which something like having a place, a hub, a place where people go is big. When I work with people who don't have housing, I'll always try to ask them, where do you stay? Where's some place that you go often? You know, and so it's like, do you go to Sunrise? Do you go to Caritas? Do you eat at Angel House? Just because at least knowing where to look for people is important for that reason. Lack of housing for people who have a criminal history is challenging. Sometimes people go through the whole process and do all the steps, and then they are eligible for housing, but no place will actually take them. A lot of people have trauma, and so they come up for housing and they're really triggered by the neighborhood or the area or the specific location of the housing that's available. Just the general confusion of the process is a barrier. Like, I have a master's degree and I was doing the work for a long time, and I still get really confused how it's supposed to work and what all the steps are. And you know, for someone that's experiencing homelessness, that's going to be a big barrier too.
Mark, did you want to add anything?
What was that?
Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think I think it could be said for a lot of folks experiencing homelessness that they are kind of in constant trauma mode. And if I like to tell people that, you know, if you've ever had that experience where your car's broken down and you didn't have a cell phone and you were stuck along the side of the road with you needed some help and you were just feeling flustered and cars kept flying by you, to then try while that's happening to like get your ID and find a place to go and get your food stamps. Like, while you're experiencing trauma, basic tasks become very difficult, especially when we make them difficult by putting them in lots of different locations and having lots of different steps. And so I think to be homeless is to have experienced trauma. And so trying to have folks who are experiencing trauma currently or have experienced trauma in their past that may even be bigger than that, and then have them try to function in that place and acquire all those things is a really hard ask. Like Sarah was saying, it would be tough for us to do, but it's very difficult for them to do in the space where they're at, especially when they can't build up a stockpile of those things once they get them.
Sarah, can you share a little bit about how COVID-19 has had an impact on working in the hospital and jail alternative, and in general, how you feel like it's had an impact on individuals experiencing homelessness in town?
Sure. I mean, it's added obviously just a whole nother set of hurdles. It's made it a lot harder to engage with people. Like in the facility that I was working in, we had to institute extra rules, and one of the things that we always try to like walk the line of having enough rules to be safe, right? But also to be really understanding that people have trauma, people are going through a lot of stuff, and that having too many rules to follow is just going to mean, they don't stay or we can't help them. So that's one thing, people are more restricted. it's a lot harder to get in touch with clients. I mean, the new norm is basically like meet with your client on the phone, right? Video chat or phone call. Well, for a lot of our homeless clients, some of them don't have phones, some of them don't have a way to charge their phones, some of them don't have phone service. So that adds, another challenge. And then just being able to refer people to resources has changed a lot. A lot of the places that we would normally suggest people look into are not available right now. So that's really challenging too.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. I think one of the biggest challenges that COVID has brought for us as a community has been that the system that we set up in our community has kind of really fallen apart during COVID. And a lot of that is because of what I mentioned earlier, that we've kind of decoupled housing with humanitarian aid. And this is a humanitarian crisis that we're going through. And so a lot of the agencies that receive funding through like Austin City Council and things like that are not allowing their employees to go outside or have their doors shuttered. And so the agencies that are engaging tend to be very small, often faith-based, like ours or Angel House or places like that, who are unfunded, who are asking a lot of their volunteers. And so it's been really interesting to see how this has exposed that disconnect in our community between housing and humanitarian work. And I think that it's going to put pressure on us in the long term to think about how those things should be integrated better. But also it's probably going to force us to think about how we fund what we do differently when it comes to humanitarian crises like this, because unfortunately, folks sitting in a brick and mortar office who are going to get shuttered when something like this comes around are not going to be very effective when this sort of thing happens. And so the folks, especially at the beginning that we dealt with, pretty much all just fled downtown and went out to the parts of town where there were churches active, where folks were able to help them until the city kind of came around and started bringing a lot of us food and things like that. But it's been a really difficult, interesting journey. All of the normal problems that exist within the homelessness community have just kind of been amplified during this time. And the things that were difficult to get before are even more difficult to get now. So it's really, really tough.
And you kind of went into this again, Mark, but what roles do NGOs, nonprofits, and religious organizations play in serving individuals experiencing homelessness, and how do they differ from government-run programs?
Yeah, I mean, we honestly don't have a lot of government agencies in Travis County doing work. So most of the work is being done by nonprofits. I would probably draw a distinction between kind of the traditional nonprofits that have kind of occupied the space for a long time and some more upstart ones. Here in Travis County, we've got a few upstart agencies, I feel like, and groups that are faith-based that have kind of existed on the periphery and are now starting to take up more of a leading role as the city kind of thinks outside of the box. And so I guess I would say that the agencies that have kind of been traditionally aligned with more like the city council's perspective on doing things would be like ECHO and Front Steps and Integral Care to an extent. And some of these agencies that are now kind of starting to push the edges would be like Sunrise, Trinity Center, which has been around for a long time, but kind of still exists on the margins a little bit. Mobile Loaves, which has been doing a lot of work during COVID. And then Other Ones Foundation, which is kind of an upstart group that has kind of just come on the scene in a very big way and is starting to create a lot of positive change. So you're starting to see kind of groups that are more agile, groups that are more they're smaller and they're able to make change quicker, and they're able to kind of get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy, are able to make big waves in the current setup.
Got someone requesting that you repeat the name of the last group that you mentioned.
The Other Ones Foundation, that might have been it.
Yeah, and I will compile a list of all the resources that we talk about and have some document ready to send out. So if you'd like that, please just write that in the comment that you're opting in. We have your email, so we can go ahead and send that to you. You can feel free to share that with other people. Sure. Okay. And then this is a question from Instagram, but what are some important details to look for to make sure the organization you're donating to is legitimate? So there seems to be like a lot of scams happening during COVID. So what are some things that we can look for, Sarah or Mark, to make sure that it is, you guys are actually, that organization is actually doing work?
I guess I can start. The things that I look, well, I guess number one would be, you bring up a good point. There are organizations that don't exist that ask for money. That's confirming they exist is a good first start. A good example recently was this ATX Helps group that was going to start this sprung shelter here in Austin and compiled, I think the news report said $1.5 million, and now just doesn't exist apparently. But they raised a whole lot of money and the governor retweeted them, and maybe they'll do something yet, but that would be an example of like, I'd like to see an actual building that you have or some people that you've housed before I give you money. That would be a good example of that. But among organizations that do exist, the things that I always look for if I'm going to give my money is I look for groups that are able to integrate multiple things together. So groups that are able to address housing and humanitarian aid and mental health care and physical health care and do that together. Groups that are able to do that are groups that I would give my money to. Groups that tend to do one thing and outsource the rest are groups that I tend to shy away from. I don't put that on anybody else, but I think that's usually a guideline for me. And then also, you know, if you really want to get practical, how many people have gotten housed through your agency? And there's agencies in town that do a lot of work and use a lot of money up and don't actually get very many people housed. And there's agencies like Integral Care, like Caritas, like Sunrise, where a lot of clients do get housed. And I think that those are important numbers to look at as well.
Sarah, this question is for you. Sorry, did you want to add anything?
I said agreed.
Okay. Please expand on reasons why it may be difficult for individuals who finally do get housing to maintain it. How does this affect those who are experiencing short-term, long-term chronic homelessness, or absolute or concealed homelessness?
Sure. I mean, that's a big question. That's a really hard thing to talk about because we kind of want to believe like, okay, this person got their apartment, hooray. And it can be really disappointing to realize like sometimes that doesn't work out. That can happen for a lot of reasons. I mean, some people's mental health problems are very, very acute. In pre-1970s, they would have probably been in a mental institution, right? And we decided as a society that we're not for that, which I agree with, but we didn't really do much to fix the problem. So sometimes people genuinely just cannot follow the rules or refrain from causing like disturbance, basically end up losing their housing that way. Also, one common symptom of like schizophrenia is being very disorganized, and sometimes people kind of wander. And so sometimes people just don't feel that comfortable staying in one place, or they don't consistently stay in a place. Like Mark said, a lot of people who become homeless already had trauma, and those that didn't, you know, being homeless in and of itself is quite traumatic. And so a lot of housing situations can reinforce the trauma. It's not treated, and they don't feel safe, right? And then a lot of people have big hearts, you know, when they were homeless, they were part of a homeless community that looked out for each other. And then becoming housed, you know, you may become housed in an apartment where the rule is you can't have guests. And it's very, very hard for the people that had your back. And if you know one of them needs a place to stay, I've known many of my clients who lost their housing because they were letting someone stay with them. And that's a tough one too, because they were, you know, doing it for really good reasons. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on and on. There's a lot of things that can still go wrong after people get housed, and they need a lot of continued support. And I know that that's something that is recognized now more and more. And ongoing services for newly housed people or formerly homeless people are becoming more robust. So I think that's probably a move in the right direction.
Yeah, I guess I'd add into that. I think those are all excellent points. The continuity of care between being pre-housed and after being housed. A lot of times there's kind of a handoff where things get dropped. And so, like, for instance, mental health medications, things like that, that are not well supported in the new living environment. And also, you know, I think another thing that could possibly be touched on is that we also have a lot of folks that are homeless who struggle with like IDD, learning and developmental issues. And we have a lot of folks who are elderly and experience memory loss. And I've had multiple clients who lost their housing because they forgot where they lived. And just the support, all that to say, supportive services are so important. They're very expensive, which is why we don't do it very often. But post-housing supportive services are very important. And keeping people connected, unfortunately, is not our forte. And a lot of it goes back to still what I was saying earlier, that integrated connection between housing and mental health care and physical health care and everything involved. We're not very good at doing that together.
Sorry. Well, I was going to say some of those things can go back to the timing issue as well. So, you know, we have services to help people get income and insurance. It's not a guarantee and it's a lengthy process. And then we have services to help people get housed. It's not a guarantee and it's a lengthy process. And they rarely happen simultaneously. So sometimes people are getting housed, but they have no income and no insurance. So someone with dementia, you know, they should be able to have like a in-home caregiver if they had insurance. And the alternative also happens where people get their income, but they have no housing. And that's an added challenge, you know, because you become accustomed to that being all discretionary. And then it's not very much. And then when you have to start spending most of it on housing, some people choose not to, or for some people that's a real struggle, understandably.
I'm throwing one other weird wild card here, and Hannah and Sarah, you guys probably have experienced this yourselves. This is a field with an extremely high turnover of employees, like working, either because of burnout or because they just move on to something else, or other reasons. But we've been doing this for about 5 years, and there are major positions that I work with in the housing world that have changed people 5, 6, 7 times already. And so even during COVID, a lot of our mental health clients have had to go through 2 to 3 caseworkers that are like dedicated to them. And that's just exhausting. And that's where a lot of balls get dropped, because there's oftentimes new caseworkers coming in who don't know the system. I had a caseworker where one of my people got kicked out of a place because they'd never heard of integral care. And I'm like, they are the mental health provider for our county and you've never heard of them. But that happens, and it really is sad that you know, in this world there's just not a lot of continuity. You know, there's not a lot of people that have been doing this for more than 3 or 4 years, and then even when there are, a lot of those people change jobs very frequently. And so I think that's also something that plays into this, and it plays into the quality of care in general.
I would give a shout out to the new Oak Springs Clinic with Integral Care, because that is their mission, is to provide ongoing support to newly housed people with kind of special attention to maintaining the housing.
Yeah, I'd agree with Sarah there. The Oak Springs Clinic, if you haven't heard of it, is a phenomenal model. If I was going to house all my people somewhere, I'd house them all at something like Terrace at Oak Springs. It's extremely expensive, again, which is, I think, part of the challenge. But they have medical people on site, mental health people on site, and none of my people that went there, which was a significant number of people, have left. And most all of them are doing as good or better than they were before. And so that's just a testament to how well it's working. So that sort of an integrated model is definitely the way to go.
And that also houses an outpatient clinic that serves newly housed and homeless people in other locations as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, I know you both of you have listed off a few things, but what are the things that are included in like post-housing care? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, what are some of the things that are included in that?
That are, or that should be?
Are, and how about both? We'll start with some of the things that are currently included, because I know that y'all mentioned too that this is an area that's expanding. It's not something that's like really very fully established yet. So maybe what it looks like currently and what in an ideal world that would look like.
I guess I would say that you have to recognize that there's different kinds of housing. So in the permanent supportive housing world, it's called permanent supportive housing. So there's a supportive element to it, and that's where you're going to get most of your after care. But that's a very small percentage of people who get housed. More people are housed through what's called rapid rehousing, which is kind of we're going to jump in, care for you for a while, and then jump out. And so in the permanent supportive housing world, it's a little more supportive. In something like Terrace at Oak Springs, it's very supportive. But in the rapid rehousing world, it's not very supportive at all. So you can add into that, Sarah, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that up to date on what is actually happening out there, but I think, you know, one thing that should be included is like really good access to mental health care and physical health care, right? And to me, that also means trauma treatment, which is a realm that no one has really ventured into, as far as I know. Even with good insurance, it's really hard to get access to trauma treatment. And then the other piece would be things that are really focused on quality of life. So like hobbies, clubs, groups, you know, things to do. It can be really hard to make a transition from being around people all the time, or at least just be really putting all your energy into survival all the time, and then just be like sitting there with nothing to do. And that's a reason that people leave and they don't spend their days and their nights in their new home. And so I think that's like, that doesn't feel like an emergency, so we don't pay that much attention to it, but it's really important.
Yeah, and also to add quickly into that, also like recognizing where the person's supportive community was before they went into their housing. So for us, we're in South Austin, pretty solidly in South Austin, at Ben White, and the vast majority of our people that get housed more than 30 minutes from here by car. And which the bus ride's much longer. So those people are getting housed up north in a lot of different locations. And so obviously their entire world, like that's their support system. A lot of them get their medication here. So to have your entire support system uprooted and then move to another location, and a lot of these housing projects that people get housed in, to be fair, are not high quality and are not great apartments. And your neighbors are not like the most upstanding folks in the world. It can be a really difficult thing, and it kind of unfortunately sometimes sets people up for failure too.
Mark, what are some common faux pas that you have observed or encountered with individuals who are trying to support people with experiencing homelessness, but it's actually not helpful? For example, like why is it important to not just hand out food on the side of the street? Things like that.
Yeah, we actually, one of our kind of new ventures that we're working on is something called Compass Network, where we're trying to help churches and any faith-based community, honestly, figure out how to be more effective with their work. There's a great book called When Helping Hurts that was written about the kind of work that a lot of well-meaning people do to help folks who are in poverty and actually end up hurting them by creating dependency or by just doing it for their own sake to make themselves feel good. Or to just kill an awkward situation. I think there's a lot of folks, and we work with a lot of churches because we are a church and people see us in that way, but there's other groups as well. A lot of folks really want to help, but don't feel like they know how. And so they either end up doing so in a very dangerous way, a really ineffective way, or they just don't do anything at all. And all three of those are really not good ways to go. So one of our goals is to kind of train churches in particular, to do work with the homeless that is strategic and that's linked to the broader service community. Because honestly, what happens sometimes downtown, and I've seen it happen myself, is that a truck will drive in with a trailer full of stuff, dump it on the pavement, and as soon as the homeless people start walking towards them, they speed off as fast as they can, so they don't have to have any actual interaction. That's not good for them. Like that actually just creates dependency, and it honestly creates a bad. It perpetuates a bad way of thinking for the giver as well. And so we try to help churches adopt smaller populations that are closer to their location, that they can get to know. And so I would say anytime what you're doing is not connected with a human connection, or anytime what you're doing is not connected to the broader strategic work of the homeless services world in your community, you're probably not being very effective. And so knowing what those things are, knowing where people can go, building up some knowledge base for yourself, and then getting to know the person personally are probably the two things that I would suggest to most people. A lot of people carry our cards around just as something to hand out to folks. So at least they can have kind of a next step place to go. And also they can hand something out the window when they're being asked for something out the window. But I think those are the two most important parts, connection to the strategic plan of the community, and also getting to know the person personally would be my two things I would suggest to almost every person.
Yeah, and Sarah.
No, I mean, I think I agree. Yeah. That if it's not personalized, you really have no idea what the effect is going to be.
And I think people don't realize the power of knowing someone. Like I've said to people before, it's very rare that I've known a non-housed person to build a 1 year long relationship with an unhoused person and have that person not find a place within that 12 months, one way or the other. It's amazing to me that oftentimes what's missing is that relationship. And once they have that one relationship, they can oftentimes, through that person's help or just through the support that they're giving, be able to self-resolve or find themselves connected to the services world and get the kind of help that they need. So if you need to do one thing today, go find a homeless person to get to know them and just don't fail them. And if you do that with one person, it'll probably help significantly.
And just to kind of loop back to why it's important to not just hand out random food on the street, bathrooms and showers are a very, very prevalent issue right now in our city, especially with COVID. There just isn't enough funding. There just isn't enough to ensure everybody's safety the way that we need to. And often if you give somebody food that is not good for their diet or something, it could actually cause them like stomach issues. It could cause more unsanitary issues, especially if they don't have hygiene products. So it's really important to make sure if you are going to, or if you feel encouraged to give food, like Mark and Sarah were saying, like it's really hard to know what to give somebody and know that it will be helpful unless you get to know them. And a great way to do that is through shelter places that often do food service. They start to gain an understanding of what types of things are good for people's diets. There are a lot of dental issues as well. So like soft foods, I've seen a lot of people drop off like apples and granola bars. Those are actually really difficult to eat if you don't have teeth. So it just is not a great idea to just give out food without really knowing who you're giving it to. And it could actually be a lot more harmful. That's another plug for if you have hygiene products, you could donate like Clorox wipes, Lysol, disinfectant spray, toilet paper, any things of that sort. Like those are great resources to be handing out to people. Okay. I'm sorry, I know we're a little bit over time, but Sarah and Mark and attendees, are you guys okay with answering one more question? I know we had, cool. Thank you. I'll start with you, Sarah. This is a really big question. So please tell us a little bit about the intersection of mental health care, crisis services, and rehousing. This is a really ambitious question, but if you had an unlimited budget, an elite team of ethical professionals at your disposal, what would an ideal transition from the streets to permanent housing look like?
Wow.
So could you solve homelessness for us?
I'm glad you gave that one to Sarah.
Okay, all right. Intersection of mental health, crisis services, and housing. So for one thing, I think, and I think integral care in particular has gotten a lot better about this in the 7+ years that I worked there, and thinking of places I worked at before, but there was a narrow definition of mental health, right? It was basically priority population, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or like a severe depression with psychosis. Everybody else, it was basically like, you don't fit the criteria. And then when people are in crisis, it's like, you hear a lot, is it a housing crisis or is it a mental health crisis? And we have gotten better about realizing that when you lose your housing, you may have a mental health crisis, even if you don't have schizophrenia, right? And so they're becoming more and more overlapping because, I mean, losing your housing is one of the biggest crises a person can experience, and it's obviously going to have like a major impact on mental health. So realizing how closely those things are linked has, I think, helped us integrate the services more. I'm not sure what the middle parts of the question were, but as far as like an ideal program, I think it would be very personalized. I mean, when you meet with a new therapy client, you ask them about everything, right? Their childhood, their work, their schooling, their relationships, their hobbies, right? And then you work to think of what are the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 things that you need, you know? And when it comes to housing, well, we know everybody needs housing, but some people might really need to be busy and like work or volunteer. Some people might need to be close to a certain community. Some people might need like a lot of assistance with their physical or mental health care. And so if that could be happening like right in the beginning of the assessment process, that would make a big difference. And then I think obviously the simple answer is just increasing the amount of resources available, because that's the biggest barrier right now, that there's not enough to go around. And then, like I said, that creates these delays and bottlenecks that ends up really, we have to spend a lot of energy not getting things done, and same for the people who are trying to access services.
I would add 2 things into that. One is that it's virtually impossible for people who are homeless to get therapy. You know, like they can get meds, but it's really difficult to get therapy. And as all of us know, therapy is a pretty important piece, whether you're housed or unhoused. And then the other piece that to me is probably the most glaring need in our community right now as it relates to homelessness is the ability to get and take your medication. What's really unfortunate to me is the amount of money that we spend on mental health care in our community, through prescribers, through you know, just folks seeing people, through caseworkers. And I don't know that anyone's ever actually studied this, but I'm just going to say anecdotally from the backside, watching the majority of my people go through the mental health care process, like probably 1 to 2% of people ever get to the end of a script. Most people never get the scripts, and if they do get the scripts, they usually get stolen within a few days. And that's assuming they saw a provider even to start with. So like there's a massive mountain to do an intake. It's really difficult to get an intake, especially right now. Then there's a massive mountain to see a provider. Then and that provider can write a script. Then there's the mountain of getting your meds. Then there's the mountain of holding on to your meds. Then there's the mountain of taking your meds correctly. And there are no facilities that I know of in Travis County other than Sunrise that will actually help you manage your medications, where you can actually just show up and you know, and get your medications, which is really sad to me, because I feel like that's something that we should be addressing as a community, because it really doesn't make sense to keep having psych providers see people over and over and over again if they can't get their meds and take their meds in a way that's safe and makes sense.
Speaking to the therapy piece, Sarah was my supervisor, so we would have like weekly trainings of just learning about different modalities and reviewing things that we might have learned that could be helpful. Therapy is extremely dependent on individualization. You can't just have the same interventions for somebody just because it's like, oh, trauma, we'll do trauma-informed care. That doesn't necessarily work. It's not necessarily going to be successful. You have to get to know that person, and you have to build rapport. You have to build trust, especially if they have been living on the streets for a long time. They have so much trauma. They have so many experiences with getting their medication stolen or being in violent skirmishes, whatever. It takes a really long time to build up a relationship with that individual and then tailor your therapeutic services to them, and that gets expensive. You have to consistently see them, and that's also really difficult too. So, you know, supporting petitions and bills that allow more money to be given to mental health services is integral and is absolutely a part of curing and ending homelessness in our country. There's no way that you can do without it. Okay. Thank you, Sarah, for taking on that question.
Sure.
Sarah's like one of my favorite supervisors of the course. I wanted to give her a really good question.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I said it was hard to hear me. Is it a little bit better now?
Yes, we got you.
Oh, okay. Last question. Mark, how do you think services differ for those who are living in rural areas rather than urban ones?
I mean, obviously, there's just a lot less connection to care. I mean, there aren't there aren't as many people by far living in rural areas. And I don't know what you mean by rural, if you just mean kind of like outlying communities. I've done the point in time count a couple times in kind of the more outreaching parts of Travis County, and we drove all night and found 1 person or 0 people. So I don't think there's a ton of people out there, but I will say that the farther you get away from downtown in Austin, the more difficult it is to access services. And that a lot of that has to do with bus lines and how frequent the bus lines are. And also the fact that, Austin is still kind of crawling out of an old school model of serving homeless people that were within 10 square blocks of the Arch. And so, we've done a lot to figure out how to become a mobile-based system, but there are still a lot of gaps, and especially the farther you go out. So I live by South Park Meadows, which is not rural by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a long ways from downtown. And we've counted with the county folks, we think there's about 120 people living near South Park Meadows. And those people are just being completely unserved by almost every agency in town. And it's really not that far, and Austin's going to continue growing. And the same thing is true in the north part of town. I was up on 183 in Oak Knoll yesterday, up near Lakeline, and the populations up there are exploding. And a lot of those people are coming from downtown. And so to Sarah's earlier point, one of the big changes that happened about 5 years ago is that if Sarah and I were looking for John Smith because he got pulled for housing 6 or 7 years ago in Austin, you just had to drive around a 10 square block area and you could probably find John Smith. Now John Smith could be anywhere, in a city of 2.5 million people, across an hour-long driving stretch, and could be anywhere. And now we've also kind of defunded a lot of these day centers, and so you've also got the reality that the checkpoints have become fewer, and the geographic region has become much bigger. And so what it means is there's a lot of people that are getting pulled for housing that don't end up getting connected to their referrals or to their agencies. And especially during COVID, a lot of these folks are just getting passed over because, the caseworkers are not allowed to go look for them or go visit them. And so for folks in our neck of the woods that are kind of farther flung, it's really difficult to get access to services. And then when you go farther out from where we are, it's definitely difficult. So to have checkpoints like a navigation center in this area is huge for most of our people, because that's how they get connected to the different services that they need. And it would be wise, I think, for the city to invest in multiple navigation centers in different parts of the city to be those checkpoints, to be able to connect the system, because the system really has not adapted to the scattered nature of the homeless population in Austin yet. And then if you think about kind of what's going on in San Marcos and Kyle, where there is increasing homelessness, those folks are even farther behind the 8 ball. We've been working with the city council in San Marcos to make some policy changes, and they're having to do this all without the kind of central resources that we have here. It's very difficult. And to be fair, a lot of those people are getting put on buses and sent to bigger places that do have resources, and that's probably not the greatest way to approach it. But homelessness is, I think if we flash forward 10 years from now, homelessness is going to be the biggest issue in our country, in every part of the country. And we're all going to have to figure out what we're going to do about it. I think we're all able to kind of ignore it a little bit right now. And I think Austin is wrestling with how to not ignore it, but how to also not have it complicate our lives. I think if you flash forward 10 years, it's gonna be something that every single person's gonna have to think about. Every house of worship is gonna have to think about. Every agency is every company is gonna have to think about. We're all gonna have to have a way that we address it, you know, and figure out what our position is going to be and how we're going to engage in a thoughtful way.
Do you want to add anything, Sarah?
No, that was great.
I like how Sarah, can I hire Sarah? Because she just agrees with everything I said.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Sounds good.
And to that, I think that's an excellent transition to kind of what kind of started this whole petition or campaign that we're doing. Is Megan got that petition in the mail from Save Austin Now. She posted about it, and I read it, and it really affected me. And it is cutting off people from accessing services, the ones who are camping downtown, specifically under I-35. His petition, Matt,
Yeah.
He's the one behind this petition. He is proposing to have it be banned so people can't be in the downtown area or near the UT campus area. Recently, camping on public streets was decriminalized, and this petition is to recriminalize it. And so
It's to repeal the repeal.
yeah. So to cut people off from being able to access services, especially with buses being so difficult, like it costs money to have bus passes. It costs money to be able to travel. It is a huge strain on your time as well. You have to potentially leave your belongings behind if you are going to go downtown to access services. There's a line, especially with COVID. A lot of things are closed down or not in full capacity. So it would just be really, really harmful if this petition goes through to be able to close it down again. So Megan is going to talk about a few of the things that we've come up with that hopefully can combat this petition from actually going through back to city council to be voted on.
Sure. So I want to preface this with, this is the first time I've ever done anything like this at all. Like there was a day where I got into a rabbit hole just reading all of the city council meetings. And I was like, I'm not learning anything. It's just whereas. So it's been a learning experience for me. So one, I want to apologize if I like misquote anything. Please feel free to correct me. This is very new to me. But basically I got that, and so when I started working with Hannah, I was like, what can we do? So first off is like, what happens when a petition gets signed and goes to city council to be passed this code? If it gets signatures, there's nothing that city council can do. They just put it on the ballot, right? So they can't be like, no, you got your signatures, but it goes on the ballot if it gets the signatures. If not, then they have to start over again. So line of defense there was really hard because it's like, you know, they're sending this out. They're obviously like targeting areas, sending these letters out. You know, we live in Terrytown, and I don't know people who live on the east side who received this letter, you know. Kind of the next line of defense was like, well, we need to educate people that this could possibly be on the ballot, right? So let's create a platform now so that people know that they can tune in with us and what we're doing to see what's happening with that, because there's a possibility it's going to be on the ballot. And then secondly, one thing that is happening that has been happening for a while, and there's a couple of organizations I found that have worked with it in the past, but they've kind of gone silent in Austin, which is doing like sweeps of encampment areas, where they're going in and literally just, they say that they're going in to like clean up the area to help pick up trash and stuff, but it's actually turned into a lot of like destruction of shelters, stolen property. So people are leaving for the day to, you know, go get services somewhere, and they come back and their stuff is gone. So we have decided that we would like to, our first step to be trying to help with that, to discontinue the sweeps. The organization I was talking about is called Stop the Sweeps here in Austin. I reached out to them. I didn't hear anything back. I'm sure they're very busy and there's a lot going on right now in the world. But so I kind of read up on what they do, and I got a lot of information from them, just their Facebook, about like kind of what they recommend doing. So we actually made postcards. There are no rules about these cleanups right now. There's none in place. They just contract it out, and the police are present for some of these cleanups, and things are just taken. So what we're doing is we're asking that the city provide safe and clear guidelines for these cleanups, that if they're going to go in, they cannot remove property unless it is like verbally or expressed with written word that like, yes, this is free to take, you can throw this away for me. But I feel like people leave their stuff behind and it just gets swept out from underneath them. Identification materials, which, you know, y'all have touched on a few times about being really hard to get a hold of. So that's the first thing we're doing. These will actually be in all of the bags that people will be purchasing today. And it's already written out, and it's already addressed to the city manager's office, who is the person who oversees, who has the contract to do the cleanups and stuff. So that is one thing that we're doing.
Yeah, and we're gonna put the stamp on it for you, so you just have to stick it in the mail.
Just put it in the mailbox, y'all.
Sign and date it on the bottom, just so it's personalized. It's a really easy way to get this issue taken seriously.
Yep, absolutely. And then secondly, another thing that we're working on is creating signage for people actually experiencing homelessness to put near their belongings if they need to leave. So it says something like, hey, this is my property. And just like if you were to go to campgrounds and you saw somebody's tent, if you go through it, rummage it, destroy property, take property, that's a crime. I'm allowed to camp here. By taking or destroying my property, that is a violation of city code, 9411. So we're trying to help people advocate for themselves as well. We're still kind of working out the details on that whole situation. We're definitely not trying to get anybody in trouble or make any tensions worse. So that's just kind of a process now, but trying to help people advocate for themselves as well is definitely something we're looking towards. And these are like super short term. We realize that these are, the sweeps may not always be around, but we want to try and get in where we can and make a difference as quickly as possible, I guess.
Yes, and I would just like to highlight another organization called Homes Not Handcuffs in Austin. What they're doing is they are going around, well, the early elections are over, but they were at election sites trying to get people to, if they sign the ballot, to take their name off the petition, because the way that Save Austin now is phrasing it is, oh, we're just going to relocate people and put them in shelters.
It's super vague. It's intentionally vague.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no shelter availability. So where he is proposing to put people to, when he is pushing them out of their like current home, is really dangerous. There's just like a lot of vague language there. So if you could just go to the Save Austin Now website and then read some articles, which I can put in the document that I'm going to send out later, just spread the word about why it's harmful. Just highlight like why the language he's using is so untrue and misinformed. And then hopefully we